What is up, everybody? It is me, DevilNeverCry. We are back with another video, this time briefly going over the Devil May Cry comics, which not a lot of people know about. I think everybody knows about the manga because it was around that time that DMC3 and the Devil May Cry series was kind of starting to reach its gradual ascent into somewhat mainstream popularity. But all the way back in 2004, a series of comics were created to loosely cover the first Devil May Cry. Published, I believe, by Dreamwave Productions, the comic lasted 3 issues between 2004 and 2005 before Dreamwave ended up going bankrupt for some reason or the other, and the DMC comic was essentially left unfinished, just like the manga, leaving readers to wonder what exactly was going to happen next. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that's pretty silly. We know how these things end. We've played the games, DNC. What are you talking about? And the reason I say that is because I said the comics loosely follow the events of the first game. There's a lot of differences between the comic and the game, which is kind of what I wanted to get into here, starting with Volume 1. We're actually given a little bit of a backstory with Mundus and Sparda. In fact, we actually see the final bout between them before Sparda obviously usurps Mundus and ends up sealing him away. And then we cut to Dante actually rescuing a lady from some Beelzebub enemies, which you'll remember from DMC1 being the creepy bugs. Anyway, Dante has Alistair at this point before he even meets Trish, which is an interesting decision to make. No idea why he's not using the Force Edge. And it turns out that Dante here actually uses a strap to keep his devil arm attached to his back. You know, I think collectively, fans of the DMC series have just kind of, come to terms with the fact that maybe it's demon magic that's keeping Dante's devil arm magnetized impeccably to his back, but in the comics they felt the need to add a physical strap to be like, hey, that's why it's on his back, and not because he's a demon and has demon magic. I guess they wanted to play their cards straight with the logic, but moving on, Dante finds his way home from that mission using a motorcycle. Things play out the same. Instead, Trish doesn't actually bust through the front door. She casually walks in like a normal human being, and then proceeds to throw the motorcycle at him, which is an interesting choice. Then they find their way to Malay Island. Things turn out exactly the same. Trish ditches him almost immediately, jumping over that cliff. Dante finds his way into the castle using a mysterious hole in the ground, which somehow miraculously seals itself up directly behind him. He makes his way through the castle, having some weird flashbacks about Mundus's fight with Sparda, before he is accosted by Phantom in the cathedral, and that is where Volume 1 ends. Now, so far things seem pretty ordinary. Dante meets Trish, goes off to Malay Island, fights some puppets, and then ends up running into Phantom. That covers roughly the first 3 missions. Here's where things tend to get a little more interesting with Volume 2. Volume 2 actually opens up with Trish pressing some of the civilians in Dante's town for information, specifically about Enzo and about Dante, with a civilian telling Trish that Dante is unkillable and that she's wasting her time. Cutting back to the present fight, Dante's actually struggling a little with Phantom, as I'm sure most of us did with our first fight against him. That was a pretty tough boss back in the day. But Dante ends up blinding Phantom before stabbing him, which leads to Phantom disappearing, and Dante assumes him to be dead. It is at this point that we find out that Nello Angelo, aka Virgil, aka the big brother, aka Deadweight's dad, and Mundus are actually watching Dante and his escapades throughout Malay Island and the castle, and Mundus actually gives Nello his blessing to go forth and prove that he is the stronger of the two. Meanwhile, Dante, having defeated Phantom, swaggers his way into the library for a little bit of a break. He actually sits down and takes some time to read through the book to see what exactly happened to this castle. When he took the mission, Trish had essentially told him that for the past 20 years, followers of Mundus had fled to the island in an attempt to find a way to resurrect him. Dante, having read through all of the books he could find, comes to realize that nothing mentions Mundus whatsoever. All of the Castellan's journals are pretty standard and line up with what a Castellan would usually be doing, which is somewhat different to what the books say in-game. If you actually interact with some of the items and books in DMC, they'll make mention of things like unnatural harvest times, strange modifications being made to the castle, people going mad in the night, and just unearthly things being heard in the middle of the night, which all obviously point to something being very, very wrong. Trish eventually finds her way to the library, in which Dante ends up chastising her because, you know, nobody told them about the lethal puppets or the giant lava spider just roaming the halls. And it's at this point that the reunion is essentially broken up by Phantom reappearing yet again. Dante, having essentially escaped the library and being forced yet again to split from Trish, finds his way into the Castellan's bedroom. Dante himself isn't quite sure as to how, but he makes a note that the castle itself is unnatural and seems to change its shape and structure by its own volition, and this is when he finds himself face to face with Nello Angelo. Instead of having a awesome little showdown outside the mirror, Dante literally yeets himself out of the window, falls to the courtyard, and their battle begins. It essentially plays out the same way, with Nello just choking the absolute life out of him before finding the amulet and, you know, losing his mind and disappearing into a vortex. Where things change, though, is that immediately after this, Dante doesn't have any time to recover, and Phantom just comes waltzing on in for a round 2, which, you guessed it, pretty much ends the same way, with Dante eviscerating him and Trish looking on, just thinking, oh my god, what have I done? The comic then jumps to somewhat of a cliffhanger as somehow Dante and Nello find themselves face to face in the sewers, in the waterways underneath the castle, in which Nello pierces through Dante's chest whilst uttering, "Forgive me, mother." And that is the end of Volume 2. So Volume 2 seems to cover, I want to say, between missions 4 and 8. We've got the first encounter with Nello, we've got both encounters of Phantom wrapped up. Nello, for some reason, is able to speak and is actually conscious of his choices in the comic, which is entirely different to how he was portrayed in the game, which is pretty much just a mute, saying literally nothing, other than some grunts, obviously, as he attacks us. But it's a strange and interesting place to take it. We also seem to see more of Nello and Mundus actually talking to each other, and Mundus actually giving out orders to his supposed right-hand man. But as mentioned, I don't think any of this is supposed to be taken as canon. Let's move on to Volume 3. Volume 3 opens up with a flashback. Dante and Virgil are fighting in the field outside of their house before Dante is rudely awoken by Trish, who gives him what looks like a devil star to heal him from his mortal wound, before Dante complains about being bested by Nello. It's at this point that Trish and Dante make their way across the courtyard, with Dante lamenting as to why they're moving away from the castle, and that's when they're essentially set upon by a set of blades and, you guessed it, again, split up. Dante decides the next best course of action is to jump down a hole in the ground because he sees some blue light. He follows the cavern up until a wall, which he breaks through, and lo and behold, he finds his way to the ship from Mission 12. Now, of course, he sets upon the ship, does the whole business with the Fires of St. Elmo, and he faces Griffin for the first time, in which he swiftly defeats, but not before Griffin tells him that if he continues down the path he's on, he'll be overtaken by his dark side. But Dante decides to ignore him and continue on his quest. We come back to Nello and Mundus again, watching Dante on his escapades, and Nello again swears that he will defeat Dante once and for all. And thus we cut to the Mission 17 showdown. We don't know what Dante was up to, but all of a sudden he's facing Nello for one last time in that throne room, which, yeah, brings back some bad memories of DMD mode. Lo and behold, the two reminisce between the fights they had as kids, and they all discuss and lament being overtaken by their dark side, and how Dante now somehow has access to a devil trigger, though it's not really much of a devil trigger, just more of an electrical aura because he's using Alistair. And right at the last moment, Dante uses a trick from his childhood and runs Nello Angelo through, essentially freeing him, as he puts it. And then, shock twist, Trish comes out of nowhere from behind and shocks Dante, leaving him completely unconscious, and that is how Volume 3 concludes. And that's in fact how the comics conclude, because we're not getting a Volume 4. That's it. That's the end. So Volume 3 here seems to cover missions 1 through to mission 17, albeit in a stunted way, no doubt due to the fast and snappy pacing they wanted from the comics, but essentially we miss out on grabbing Ifrit, we miss out on the first Griffin boss fight outside next to where you meet the Blades. We also miss out on the third fight all the way in the Colosseum. We miss Dante's trek back to the castle. We miss out on Nightmare entirely. And it's very strange. You know, we don't even see the Frosts or the Nobodies, though I guess the Nobodies come a little bit later. But that's essentially it. I like, I guess, some of the liberties they took with DMC1 and their interpretation of it. I think it would have been strange for them to do a comic which is straight up just, you know, a one-to-one replica of the video game. I think they fleshed some things out. I think it was pretty cool to see Nello actually have a little bit of a conscience and, you know, actually speak to Dante as opposed to saying nothing whatsoever. I also thought the whole angle of Dante defeating Nello and releasing him, or, you know, making him free from the shackles of Mundus was pretty cool. And then of course we get the twist with Trish completely just destroying Dante out of nowhere, which is supposed to happen in the Nightmare boss fight, but they completely cut out Nightmare. I assume probably because Nightmare would be a boring boss to replicate in the comics, considering that he doesn't speak at all in the game. You know, at least Phantom spoke, and they gave Nello a voice because it makes sense, but I don't know what they would have done with Nightmare. But that pretty much wraps up the differences between the comics and the games. I wish I could have actually shown off some of the pages, but I don't actually have any means to scan them in as of yet. Maybe I'll do so in the future. But if you can get your hands on them, I definitely think it is worth it. Pretty cool collector's item to have, and as I mentioned, they're getting rarer and rarer by the day. If you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a like, and of course, you got to subscribe to stay up to date with anything and everything Devil May Cry. And also let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Are you a fan of some of the changes they made and the way they fleshed things out, or are you a hardcore purist when it comes to DMC? With all that said and done though, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.